Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this broadcast. My name is Sonia Keeve, and I am the CEO and founder of Sisters with the Voice Podcast Network. And I have the esteemed pleasure to help women entrepreneurs get unstuck from thinking about starting a podcast to building, launching, and monetizing a podcast in just 30 days. And so today, as you are coming in, catching this live, or perhaps if you catch this in a replay, I want to welcome you to today's talk, which is entitled How to Create Content for Your Podcast and Why It Does Not Have to Be Complicated. So, I want to just share with you a little story. So, when I first started podcasting, I launched my first show back on March 10th of 2018 called Inspiring Nations with Sonia Keeve. And creating that content for that show, when you first are starting out as a solo style podcaster, sometimes you can find yourself getting in overwhelmed and trying to figure out, how do I create content for my podcast that is not only going to be engaging, but also informing or educating my audience so that it allows them to take the next step? And so I just want to just dispel some myths for you right now. The first one is you have enough. In fact, you have more than enough content for your podcast show. But you have so much content that perhaps you're feeling like, I don't know how to organize it so that I don't get into the overwhelm and that I am expressing my expertise effectively so that I don't lose listeners and so that I have an engaging podcast that can sustain the test of time. And so there are three key strategies that I want to just present to you on how you can create your content where it doesn't seem complicated and you can create and do your content with ease and no stress. And the first pillar is understanding, when you're creating your content, who is your content for? That requires for you to understand your target listener. Now, you can get into overwhelm in this particular area when you're trying to think of masses of people that your content is going to be for. So, kind of niche down. If you had the ideal listener, who would that be? Who is your message for? Because as a podcaster, your content is the solution to the problems for that listener that's tuning in to hear your show. So you really want to identify who your message is for. Because when you can tailor that to the who, then the next place that you can now go to is answering the question, is what must my listening audience learn or get as a result of tuning into my show? Because there has to be this overall goal, right, for your podcast. You don't want to just have a podcast just to say that you have one. There is some intentionality to why you are creating the podcast. And it's because you have an expertise, you have a message, and you know deep in your heart that you drive and deliver results and value with your content that you're sharing. So, understanding number two, the second pillar is, what must my listening audience gain as a result of listening to my show? Because as people are tuning in to hear your podcast show, your expertise, you're going to be offering them steps, tools, resources, advice. You're going to help your listening audience be able to take the next step to helping them to solve the pain point that they are currently experiencing. So you already are the expert. So all of the information you have is up here in your head. So now you just need to simply write it out and just identify, asking number one, okay, who is this for? Get very clear about that. Is it women? Is it men? Is it both? Is there a certain age demographic that you want to reach out to? And then why, and then what do they need to learn from you? What is that next step that you are instructing them to take? Because when you want to get clients for the products and services that you have, people will buy from those they know, like, and trust. And I also like to add a fourth thing: for those that get results. So if your clients are getting results from your content that you're sharing, where you're giving them those next steps, those tools, those resources, trust and believe they're going to keep tuning into your show, because they can see the value add that you have, and that they implemented the steps and tools or resources that you provided. And now they are now they are having the opportunity, excuse me, now they're having the opportunity to go ahead and elevate to the next step in their process. Okay. So understanding the what. And then the third pillar in creating the content for your podcast, why it doesn't have to be complicated, is knowing your why. Why are you creating this podcast show? Why do you want people to tune in? Why should they listen to you? And only you can answer those questions, because you're the expert, you're the podcast host, you're the one that's created the platform. And now you want to tune it out. You want to not tune it out, but you want to broadcast it out to everyone that could possibly learn from your expertise. So creating content doesn't have to be complicated. And so when you understand the who, the what, and the why, now you can take a piece of paper and outline your thoughts. And so with your content, when you are creating it, just like we learned in school when we wrote book reports, we always had to have a beginning, a middle, and the end, right? And so the same is true for your content that you're creating for your podcast show. You want to make sure that in the beginning, you are introducing yourself, letting your listening audience know what's the topic that we're going to discuss. Why are we going to discuss it? Sprinkle in your own personal stories there. It's because what happens is when you do that, it really resonates with your listening audience, and they can see themselves in you. So in that beginning, kind of lay the foundation, what we're going to talk about today and why this topic is important. And then in um, the middle, I like to say, is the meat and potatoes of your podcast show. So that's where you're giving your listening audience those next steps, the tools, the resources, things that they can take action on right now. Because remember, anytime we give tips or resources, it needs to be not only value added, but it also needs to be actionable and implementable, so that when they implement it, then guess what? They'll get the results, the desired results for the problem or the pain points that they are experiencing. And then the end of your story or your content, and writing it out with a beginning, middle, and end. Then at the end, do a recap what you talked about at the top of the hour. Or this is the great time for you to plug in your products or services. So if you're a coach or a consultant, for example, and you've given your listening audience some tools and resources to implement, now you can say, hey, and for more resources, go to my website, or go to whatever pages or social media presence that you have, so that your listening audience now has a step beyond the show where they can now connect with you and dive in deeper to the pain points that they may have. And this is a great time to just segue that in the ending of your show. And so with these three steps, always remember, it doesn't have to be complicated when you're creating your content. As long as you understand three significant pillars as you're creating the content: understanding who is your audience, understanding What must your listening audience gain as a result of tuning into your show? And then why should they listen to you? Why should they download this podcast? Why should they share it with the world? Because when listeners are tuning into your show, they're getting the steps, the value add where they can implement it and then get the results. Guess what happens? They will refer your show to multiple people, their friends and family. Your show will begin to be heard around the world because guess what? This platform of podcasting allows you to be able to have a global reach. And guess what? It all started with really understanding your who, what, and why. And then when you're creating that content, write it out, outline it with a beginning, middle, and end. And as long as you have that sort of focus with creating your content, you will find it becomes easier and easier to create when you understand where you're going. So I hope that these 3 tips really help you to see the simplicity with how you can create content for your podcast and why it doesn't have to be complicated. Well, thank you so much for tuning into today's broadcast. And of course, if you have not heard, I am hosting my inaugural live conference event called Podcasters Rock 2022. It will be on November 18th and 19th in Fredericksburg, Virginia at the Hampton Inn and Suites. And we have amazing leaders that are coming through to help you to be able to get unstuck from thinking about a podcast to truly building your podcast, growing your business, getting the visibility that you need. And so tickets are on sale right now. So get your tickets today for Podcasters Rock 2022. You can find me on all social media channels at Sonia Keeve. And I want to thank you again for tuning into this broadcast. My name is Sonia Keeve, CEO and founder of Sisters with the Voice Podcast Network, where I help women entrepreneurs to build, launch, and monetize a podcast in just 30 days. So thank you again. Create that content for your podcast. And if you need help, I can help you create that content and launch your podcast today. Take care, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.